I'm Emily, and at 28, I've finally come to terms with a brutal truth. My life was almost erased before it even began, simply because I wasn't the son my mother so desperately wanted. Sounds harsh, I know, but that's my reality. Mom envisioned a pair of boys, a perfect, athletic duo to carry on the family name and fulfill some ideal she held. When I came along, a girl, it felt like a devastating blow to her plans. My Aunt Rachel, who remains a close confidant, shared a story years ago that's haunted me ever since. Apparently, upon learning she was carrying a girl, Mom explored the possibility of ending the pregnancy. By the time she seriously considered it, it was deemed too late, medically risky. So I was born, not from joy, but from a sense of obligation, a living reminder of a dream deferred. She never explicitly said I was unwanted, but her actions spoke volumes. The way she looked at me, the dismissive tone in her voice when she thought I couldn't hear, it all painted a clear picture. I was a colicky infant, a demanding toddler, a challenging child. I never seemed to measure up to some impossible standard. Then there was Jake, my older brother, 2 years my senior. He could do absolutely no wrong in their eyes. He was the golden child, the epitome of everything I wasn't: effortlessly charming, brimming with confidence, and, frankly, a complete jerk. But Mom and Dad were blinded by his supposed perfection. According to them, and maybe even still now, he could practically walk on water. Jake wasn't just the favorite. He was the architect of my misery. It seemed his sole purpose was to make my life as difficult as possible. Growing up, Jake had a talent for getting me into trouble, a masterful skill in deception. Anything that went wrong in the house was instantly pinned on me. Mom's prized vase shattered? Clearly, Emily was responsible. Money missing from Dad's wallet? Must be me. He would invent elaborate, improbable lies, and without fail, my parents believed every single word. Eventually, I stopped defending myself. What was the point? They simply wouldn't listen. Jake was always just being a kid, innocent and harmless, while I was the designated troublemaker who needed to learn proper behavior. But Jake's cruelty extended beyond the walls of our home. He poisoned my school life as well. He spread rumors about me, sometimes so subtly that I didn't even realize he was behind it at first. I'd notice friends drifting away, becoming distant, only to discover weeks later that Jake had told them I said something mean about them or that I was too strange to be around. By middle school, my circle of friends had dwindled to almost nothing. I couldn't even invite people over to our house for fear of Jake's antics. He'd either humiliate me in front of them or later use snippets of conversations against me, twisting my words to make it sound like I was bad-mouthing our parents or being ungrateful. And, of course, Mom and Dad would always take his side without question. The favoritism was blatant and relentless. Each year, Jake was treated to a lavish birthday party, complete with friends, decorations, and even a rented bounce house once. My birthdays, on the other hand, were marked with a simple cake at the dining table, maybe a card if they remembered. One year, they completely forgot. Jake, of course, made sure to remind me of their oversight, sneering, "Guess you're just not that important." I wasn't a perfect child. I'll admit that. I wasn't overly outgoing, and yes, I was perhaps more sensitive than most, but can you honestly blame me? Growing up, it felt like my voice simply vanished the moment it left my lips. In our house, my needs and opinions were secondary, often completely disregarded. It was like shouting into a dark, bottomless well, desperate for a single echo, any sign that someone acknowledged my existence, my feelings. My brother, Jake, and my parents were the center of our family universe, and Jake knew he was the brightest star. He basked in their adoration and used it as a weapon against me. Any attempt to assert myself, to call him out on his behavior, would be met with a swift counterattack. He'd run to Mom and Dad, twisting the narrative to portray himself as the victim of my supposed cruelty. It didn't matter that he was the one who started it. He was the favored one, and I was always in the wrong. I remember the one time I thought things might be different. Back in high school, I mustered every ounce of courage to audition for the school play. I didn't land a lead role, but I secured a part one was genuinely proud of. The excitement bubbled up inside me, and I told my parents, hoping they might actually come to see me perform. Jake immediately chimed in with a dismissive sneer. Why would anyone want to watch her embarrass herself on stage? My mother's reaction was even more disheartening. Instead of defending me, she simply shrugged and said, "Maybe next time, Emily." In that instant, the truth crystallized in my mind. They weren't just indifferent. They were actively uninterested in my life, my accomplishments. Jake's cruelty wasn't just impulsive. It was calculated. He possessed an uncanny ability to pinpoint my insecurities and exploit them to make me feel insignificant. The most infuriating aspect of it all was that he never faced any repercussions. Mom and Dad never reprimanded him. In fact, their unwavering support inadvertently encouraged his behavior. Each day felt like an uphill battle, a constant struggle against forces I couldn't overcome. I tried to immerse myself in schoolwork and hobbies, searching for a refuge from the negativity. But Jake was always there, lurking like a shadow, ready to undermine my confidence. And my parents? They remained oblivious, or perhaps simply uncaring. In their eyes, Jake could do no wrong, and I was merely an inconvenience, a mistake they couldn't undo. And yet I survived. Perhaps it was sheer stubbornness, a refusal to be completely broken, or maybe it was the faint, persistent hope that things would eventually improve. But I learned a valuable lesson. You can't force someone to love you. You have to find the strength to remove yourself from the toxic environment, to seek out a life where you are valued and appreciated. That's precisely what I did. By my 18th birthday, I was utterly done with my family. I knew that my only chance at happiness was to escape the suffocating atmosphere of our home. So, I poured every ounce of energy into my studies. It wasn't just about getting good grades. It was about fighting for my freedom, my future. I worked tirelessly to earn a scholarship to a college far away, out of state. I applied to every program I could find, wrote countless essays, and navigated the complex maze of financial aid forms. The moment I received my acceptance letter from a school in California, along with a partial scholarship, I wept not from sadness, but from relief. I finally saw a path to a different life, a life on my own terms. The day I left for college, I didn't even receive a cursory "we'll miss you" from my parents. They had been eager to help Jake pack and move into his fully furnished apartment when he decided to live on his own. But for me, I received a perfunctory pat on the back and a half-hearted good luck. My mother even had the audacity to say, "Don't forget to call us if you need help," knowing full well they wouldn't lift a finger. Jake remained in our small Illinois hometown, living the life of Riley on my parents' dime. They covered everything: his rent, his car payments, even his groceries. Meanwhile, I was entirely on my own. I remember stepping into my empty dorm room, gazing at the bare walls, and realizing that this was the first time I had ever truly been free. It was a terrifying and exhilarating sensation, all rolled into one. Once I left, my parents wasted no time in distancing themselves from my life. Initially, I made an effort to stay in touch. I called them a few times, but the conversations were strained and superficial. They never inquired about my well-being or my academic progress. Instead, they filled me in on the minutiae of Jake's life. His new car, the extravagant party he was hosting, the blossoming romance with his girlfriend Sarah. It didn't take long for me to realize that they simply didn't care about my experiences, so I stopped calling. And honestly, they didn't seem to notice. Our family group chat transformed into the Jake Show, a constant stream of updates on his trivial accomplishments, like how he grilled the perfect steak at a barbecue, or his fleeting ambition to start his own business, which, predictably, never materialized. Meanwhile, I was juggling 15 credit hours, 2 part-time jobs, and endless study sessions just to maintain my scholarship. There were days when I genuinely questioned my ability to make it through. I'd work late shifts at the campus coffee shop, then stay up until the early hours of the morning cramming for exams, fueled by caffeine and sheer determination. The ramen and dollar store mac and cheese were my staples. Every day felt like a tightrope walk, and pride kept me from calling home. Not that they'd be eager to help anyway. I just refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me stumble. Yet, leaving was still something I couldn't regret. College, senior year, was where everything shifted. That's when I met Ethan, my soon-to-be husband. Finding love wasn't on my agenda. Survival was. But Ethan sort of stumbled into my life, and it was the best thing that could have happened. We were paired up for a group project in one of my classes. He was genuinely interested in me, not just for the project, but in getting to know me as a person. At first, I was skeptical. My family had taught me that kindness usually comes with strings attached. But Ethan was different. He was patient and kind, making me feel like I was worth something. One of the things that truly amazed me was Ethan's family. I'll never forget the first time he invited me to dinner at his parents' house. I was so nervous, but the moment I walked in, they made me feel welcome. His mom enveloped me in a hug as if she had known me forever. His dad joked about how Ethan only brought home the real deal. They asked about my life, my classes, and my future. They actually listened. It was such a contrast to my own family that I was taken aback at first. But over time, I began to let my guard down. Ethan's family became the support system I had always craved. During finals week, his mom would send care packages filled with snacks and encouraging notes. When my car broke down, his dad offered to help fix it, even though he barely knew me then. They treated me better in a month than my own parents had my entire life. Graduating felt like a huge victory. Of course, my parents didn't attend, but Ethan and his family were there, cheering me on. After graduation, Ethan and I moved in together. We didn't have much, but we made it work. I got a job in marketing and he started working as an engineer. We built our life together, piece by piece. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My wedding became the final break with my family. People often believe that weddings magically bring families together, healing even the most strained relationships. That wasn't my experience at all. My wedding didn't bring my family closer. It exposed just how little they cared. When Ethan proposed, I was overjoyed. He asked on a quiet hike, just the two of us. It was simple and perfect, exactly how I'd always wanted it. When I got home, I snapped a picture of the ring and sent it to my family group chat with a "I said yes" message. I wasn't expecting a huge celebration, but I thought I'd at least get a congrats or some acknowledgement. Instead, I got nothing. They left me on read. Later that night, I checked the chat and saw they'd all read the message. My mom, my dad, and of course Jake didn't reply. I even double-checked to make sure the message had actually sent. It had. They simply chose to ignore it. It was then I realized they probably wouldn't care about my wedding at all, and I was right. As I began planning, I kept trying to include them. I'd text my mom, asking her opinion on venues or color schemes. Nothing major, just things like, "What do you think of these flowers?" Or, "Do you have any recommendations for a dress shop?" Half the time, she wouldn't reply. The other half, she'd give me one-word answers like, "nice" or "pretty," which clearly meant, "I don't care." I even asked if she wanted to come with me to look at dresses. She said she was too busy. Too busy doing what? I honestly just wanted to disappear. Maybe hide behind the TV, anything to escape. So I just stopped reaching out. Ethan's mom, on the other hand, she was my rock. She practically floated with happiness during the planning. She helped me find my dress, wrangle the guest list, and even spend a weekend making centerpieces with me, gluing and glittering away like we were kids again. With her, I felt seen, like I actually mattered. But then there was Jake. He didn't just not care. He was actively working against me. My cousin Megan, bless her heart. She's the only one in the family I can truly count on, especially now that she's renting a room from my parents because her own are overseas and worried about her living alone. She told me how Jake had been poisoning the well, telling my parents that I was being disrespectful, that I was ungrateful for not including them enough in the wedding preparations. He made it sound like I didn't value their opinions and was intentionally excluding them. The infuriating part was that it wasn't true. I did try. I reached out, asked for their input, for their help. They were the ones who ignored me, who couldn't be bothered. But of course, Jake twisted everything, playing the victim, and my parents, predictable as ever, fell for it. Things came to a head when I sent out the invitations. I included my parents and Jake naturally, even though I was beginning to question why I even bothered. Weeks went by, and I hadn't heard anything. so I called my mom to ask if they were coming. Her response? "Oh, we haven't decided yet." And then I could hear Jake's voice in the background. "We should think about it." Think about it? It was my wedding. I was their daughter. But apparently, Jake had convinced them that I didn't deserve their support. He told them I only reached out when I needed something and that I didn't truly value them as a family. The hypocrisy of it all was staggering. Jake had always been the one taking, constantly leaning on them for handouts, and somehow, I was the ungrateful one for not fawning over them. As the wedding approached, the writing was on the wall. My mom completely stopped responding to my messages, and my dad barely acknowledged me when I called. Megan tried to intervene, to reason with them, but Jake just doubled down, telling them that they were supposed to be the center of attention, that I was stealing their spotlight. The irony still hits me hard. I literally begged them to be involved, to be a part of my happiness. But they made it clear they didn't want to participate, and then they twisted the whole thing to make me feel guilty. The wedding day arrived, and they weren't there. No text, no call, not a single word. Just empty seats where my parents and brother should have been. It hurt, I won't lie. Even though I knew what to expect, seeing those empty seats still stung. Ethan's family, however, they were incredible. His parents, his siblings, his cousins, they all showed up to celebrate with us. His mom even gave the most touching toast during the reception, saying how proud they were to officially welcome me into their family. After the wedding, I decided I was done. I didn't call my parents to ask why they hadn't come. I didn't send them pictures or updates. I didn't even acknowledge Jake's snide text that read, "Hope your big day was worth ignoring your family." I blocked his number immediately. What was the point of keeping the lines open when all he ever did was bring me down? If they didn't want to be a part of my life, that was their choice, but I refused to keep chasing after people who couldn't even bother to show up for me. So, while I was in California, building a life with Ethan, my brother Jake was back home, basking in the glow of his golden child status. As you might expect, my parents' obsession with Jake only intensified when he decided to get married. Jake married Sarah, and my parents went all out for their wedding. I wasn't invited, not that I would have gone anyway, but Megan kept me in the loop. She told me they practically paid for everything. The venue, the catering, the flowers, even Sarah's ridiculously expensive dream dress. Megan said the whole thing probably cost more than what most people spend on a down payment for a house. Speaking of houses, guess who got one of those too? Yep, Jake and Sarah practically walked into their dream home without lifting a finger. My parents bought it for them, a fully furnished, 3-bedroom house with 2 bathrooms in a perfectly manicured suburban neighborhood. Meanwhile, Ethan and I were struggling in California, both working tirelessly just to afford a decent apartment. Megan would call occasionally, filling me in on Jake's seemingly charmed life. She said my parents were constantly at their house, showering Jake and Sarah with attention as if they were royalty. They dog-sit, tend to the landscaping, and even stock their fridge when Sarah didn't feel like going grocery shopping. I have to admit, hearing about it did sting a bit. Not because I craved their assistance. I'd been independent for years, but because it was another stark reminder of the blatant favoritism. When I got married, they couldn't even manage a simple text message, but for Jake, the sky was the limit. For a while, it seemed like everything was perfect for Jake and Sarah. My parents bragged about them to everyone who would listen, acting as if they were the ultimate success story. Megan told me how they'd gush about Jake finding such a wonderful wife and building such a beautiful life together. But then, the narrative began to shift. After a few years, my parents started making not-so-subtle hints about grandchildren. At first, it was disguised as innocent comments about how a baby would complete their family, or how they were eagerly awaiting the chance to spoil a grandchild. But subtlety has never really been their strong suit, so it quickly escalated. Megan mentioned my mom became almost obsessed with the idea of grandkids. She would bring it up at every opportunity, constantly badgering Jake and Sarah about when they planned to start a family. My dad wasn't much better. He would make comments about carrying on the family name and how it was Jake's duty, as the eldest son, to continue the legacy. I wasn't surprised. My parents have always been strangely traditional, especially regarding family matters. It's not just grandkids they wanted, it had to be biological grandkids. Adoption was not an option in their eyes. It needed to be blood-related grandchildren, ideally a boy, to carry on the name. Jake and Sarah, understandably, tried to sidestep the topic for as long as possible. Megan said Sarah would laugh it off or quickly change the subject, while Jake would offer vague excuses about not being ready yet. But my parents weren't fooled. They increased the pressure, turning it into a constant source of tension. Megan recounted a family dinner where my mom directly asked Sarah if she was on birth control and when she planned to stop taking it. Sarah looked utterly humiliated, but my mom didn't seem to care. Then, one day during our regular catch-up call, Megan revealed that Jake and Sarah had actually been trying to conceive. They just weren't telling anyone. Apparently, they had been trying for over a year, undergoing fertility treatments, and the news wasn't good. Jake had a condition, Megan wasn't sure of the specifics, that made it almost impossible for him to have biological children. Sarah was fine. The medical issues were solely on Jake's side, and that's where things became even more complicated. Jake and Sarah didn't immediately share this information with my parents. I understood their hesitation. Knowing my mom and dad, they wouldn't have offered support or understanding. They would have been disappointed, and not in a sympathetic way. It would have been the kind of disappointment that made you feel like you had personally let them down and brought shame upon the entire family. Jake and Sarah managed to keep it a secret for a while, but secrets like that rarely stay hidden for long in our family. My parents were relentless about the grandchild issue. Every time they saw Jake and Sarah, they would make comments about when they were going to have kids, never if. Megan told me that everything finally exploded during another family dinner. My mom was, as usual, interrogating Sarah about babies, saying things like, "You're not getting any younger, you know? And you should really think about starting now before it's too late." Sarah finally reached her breaking point and blurted out something like, "It's not that simple." And that's when the truth came pouring out. She revealed everything, the fertility issues, the visits to the specialist, everything. My parents' reaction was about as awful as I expected. Megan said they didn't even try to comfort Jake or Sarah. My mom just sat there looking as if someone had told her Christmas had been canceled, and my dad muttered something about them should have told them sooner. So supportive, right? Things got strange after that. My parents didn't explicitly say they were angry at Jake, but you could tell by the way Megan described it. It was like a light switch flicked off. Suddenly, Mom wasn't calling Jake every single day, and Dad's visits to their place became less frequent. They still showered Sarah with affection, probably seeing her as their last chance for grandchildren. But Jake, that was different. According to Megan, Mom had started with the subtle digs about adoption, dropping comments like, "Well, at least it's something," or "It's just not quite the same, is it?" She'd go on and on about how their friends were real grandparents to real grandchildren. Dad, on the other hand, kept saying Jake needed to sort things out. What was he supposed to do? Snap his fingers and make his infertility vanish? Jake, for possibly the first time in his life, seemed utterly lost. He'd always been the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong. Now he was failing to meet their expectations, and it was visibly consuming him. Megan told me he'd started behaving out of character, snapping at Sarah, starting arguments over the most trivial things, even lashing out at our parents during family get-togethers. He'd always been so careful to stay in their good graces, but now, he was clearly struggling to hold himself together. Sarah wasn't faring much better. Megan told me she was tired of being treated like a baby-making machine. She began avoiding family events whenever possible, and when she did show up, she barely spoke to anyone. It was obvious she was reaching her limit. One night, Megan's call delivered news that really drove home how dire things had become. Apparently, Jake had a complete meltdown at yet another family dinner. Spot a pattern emerging. Mom had made some remark about how disappointed she was that she might never have biological grandkids, and Jake just lost it. He accused them of being selfish and reminded them that this wasn't a situation he could control. Megan said our parents were stunned into silence for a moment. Then Mom attempted to guilt-trip him with the usual, "We're only thinking about the family, and you know how much this means to us." But Jake wasn't having any of it. He stormed out and Sarah followed him. The truth is, a part of me felt sorry for Jake. Infertility is a cruel hand to be dealt, and our parents' reaction was undeniably awful. But another part of me couldn't help but think he was finally experiencing what it was like to be on the receiving end of their impossible standards. He'd never faced their disapproval or their guilt trips because he could do no wrong in their eyes. Now, he was learning what it felt like to fall short, and it was clearly crushing him. Megan said that my parents piled on more pressure to Sarah after that night. The idea of biological grandchildren was all that mattered to them, and they didn't care what it would take for them to get what they wanted. They kept pushing for solutions that were totally unrealistic, like expensive fertility treatments that Jake and Sarah couldn't possibly afford without some help. The entire thing had turned into this toxic spiral. My parents would pressure Jake and Sarah, they'd push back, and then my parents would double down. It was like nobody wanted to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, things weren't going to unfold the way they'd envisioned. I couldn't help but feel awful for Sarah. She didn't sign up for this level of insanity when she married Jake. I couldn't muster up too much sympathy for him, though. After a while, my parents, now completely furious, threatened to cut Jake off financially unless he could fix the situation, as if it were a broken washing machine that needed to be fixed. Of course, Jake depends on them to maintain the lifestyle he's grown accustomed to, and because my parents are obsessed with bloodlines and family legacy, their brilliant idea was for Jake to come crawling to me. They actually expected him to convince me to give my unborn baby their last name. Not just my baby's last name, but to continue their precious family legacy. The nerve, right? Megan called me one night, and I could hear the panic in her voice. "Emily," she said, "Jake's desperate. They're putting so much pressure on him, and now he's coming for you. Be careful." And sure enough, a couple of days later, Jake showed up unannounced at my doorstep in California. Seeing him standing there was incredibly bizarre. He looked nothing like the smug, self-assured brother I remembered. Instead, he looked exhausted and defeated, like reality had finally caught up to him. I let him in, mostly because I needed to hear what he had to say. He launched right into it, a practiced lament about the supposed hardships he'd endured since our parents discovered he couldn't have children. According to him, they'd been relentless, blaming him for shattering their grandchild dreams and threatening financial ruin unless he fixed the situation. Jake even tried to attribute past behaviors like turning our parents against me to this supposed stress. He claimed the pressure to be the perfect son was so immense, he didn't know how to cope. "I didn't want to hurt you," he managed, a pathetic whimper escaping him as he dabbed at his dry eyes. "I just didn't know what else to do." Honestly, I saw right through it. Jake's actions were never about stress. They were always about control. For years, he made my life miserable simply because he could, knowing our parents would always be on his side. Now, he expected me to rescue him from the consequences of his own actions. Absolutely not. I let him ramble on until he finally revealed the real reason for his visit. "Emily," he pleaded, "I need your help. Mom and Dad are serious about cutting me off unless I can resolve this. They're insistent on continuing the family name and think your baby is the answer. Please just give the baby our last name. It's the only way to save the family." A laugh bubbled up, surprising even me. It burst out of me, loud and unrestrained. "Jake," I managed to say when I could breathe again, "are you actually serious? After everything you put me through, you want me to hand over my child to clean up your mess? Absolutely no way." He looked genuinely shocked, as if he'd actually anticipated my compliance. Then came the guilt trip, accusing me of being petty and harboring grudges. "This isn't about the past," I said, my voice firm. "This is about protecting my own family. My children will have nothing to do with the people who treated me like I didn't even exist." He persisted, claiming I was ruining his life by refusing his request. He even attempted playing the victim, arguing he shouldn't be punished for something beyond his control. "Emily," he whined, "if they cut me off, I'll lose everything." That's when I completely lost patience. "Jake," I stated, my voice dripping with controlled fury, "you've spent your entire life taking from me, my peace, my friends, even our parents' attention, and now you want to take from my children? Absolutely not. If they cut you off, that's on you, not me. Maybe it's time you learned what it's like to stand on your own." He stormed out, slamming the door with unnecessary force. A wave of emotions washed over me. Anger, relief, and an unexpected sense of closure. It was the first time I truly stood my ground and refused to be manipulated. The feeling was liberating. A few days later, Megan called with an update. Apparently, our parents had made good on their threat and financially cut Jake off. They stopped paying for his house, his car, everything they'd been subsidizing for years. Megan said he and Sarah were struggling to adapt to a life without our parents' constant support. Sarah, accustomed to a life of luxury, was not happy. Megan overheard her complaining about how unfair it was that Jake couldn't simply fix things with me. A flicker of sympathy almost sparked within me. But then I remembered how she'd enabled my parents' toxic behavior for years. So, after Jake failed to get me to cave, our parents decided to intervene themselves. I can't say I was shocked. It started with a phone call from Mom. I hadn't spoken to her in years, literally years, so seeing her name appear on my phone was unsettling, to say the least. Initially, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered, and she immediately launched into a rehearsed-sounding apology. "Emily," she began, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness I hadn't heard since childhood. "I just wanted to say how incredibly sorry I am for everything. We've been thinking about you so much, and we miss you." "Miss me? Since when?" she continued, trying to create the impression that they'd had this profound realization about their past treatment of me. "I know we made mistakes," she acknowledged, "but we're family, and I think it's time we started fresh." I cut her off. "Is this about Jake?" I asked, cutting straight to the chase. There was a beat of silence, a hesitation on the other end of the line that told me everything. She hadn't anticipated me being so blunt. "Well, yes," she finally admitted, the cheeriness she'd started with now fading. "But it's not just about him, Emily. It's about the whole family. We're fragmented. We need to pull together, especially now, after everything." And that's when the familiar wave of guilt washed over me, carefully orchestrated. "You know how much this means to your father and me," she continued, her voice thick with forced emotion. "All we want is for things to be right again. This baby, your child, could be just what this family needs to find its way back to one another. Don't you think it's time we all just moved on? Let bygones be bygones?" I could feel the familiar heat rising in my chest, the tightening of my jaw. "Moved on," I echoed, the word dripping with sarcasm. "Are you talking about the past where I was practically invisible? The past where Jake could do no wrong, and I was always an afterthought? The past where your love for him was so big, it seemed to leave so little for me?" She stammered, trying to soften her previous stance, but I wouldn't let her. I told her, as calmly as I could manage, that my child wasn't a pawn in their family game, a tool to fix something they had broken long ago. She started to cry then, telling me how much it hurt her to hear me speak to her that way, how ungrateful I was being, but I held firm. A few days later, my dad called. If Mom's approach was carefully constructed guilt, Dad's was a full frontal assault of anger and disappointment. He launched right in, telling me how incredibly let down he was, how selfish I was being. He accused me of deliberately tearing the family apart and told me it was time I grew up and started considering the bigger picture. I let him rant, the familiar sting of his words losing some of their power over time. Finally, I cut him off. "Dad," I said, my voice flat, "let me be perfectly clear about something. My child is not your do-over. This baby is not a chance to fix whatever you broke. If you're so worried about the family's reputation, maybe you should have considered that a long time ago, way before things got to this point." He was quieter after that, the wind seemingly taken out of his sails, but he couldn't resist one last dig. "You know, Emily, your mother and I only ever wanted what's best for this family. If you can't see that, then I honestly don't know what else to say to you. That was it for me. I blocked both their numbers, blocked them on social media, everything. I haven't heard from them since, and honestly, I haven't missed them. Now I'm focused on my life, on the future that Ethan and I are building together. We'll raise our children in a home filled with love, respect, and genuine affection. something I never experienced growing up. Megan and Ethan's family have become my chosen family, my true support system, and I couldn't be more grateful for them. I've occasionally questioned whether I should feel guilty for completely cutting off my parents and Jake, but every time I revisit those thoughts, I arrive at the same conclusion. I don't owe them anything. They made their choices, and now they have to live with the consequences. Jake and my parents can continue playing their manipulative games, but I'm officially done. I'm done being the scapegoat, the afterthought, the one who always had to sacrifice my own happiness to keep the peace. I'm building a new life, a life where I am the priority.